it is. All righty. Okay, so 1973, this is work Inez described some of it, using parallel lines to create the illusion of dimension. At the same time, it had its own tactile dimension. I'm very interested in the physical relationship to materials and process and the senses. So this sort of carries through on most of my work. So now we'll move on. This is another piece done in that technique in the 70s. And this is also what I was looking at, as how an image is built of pixels and particles. So there's color separation and excuse me, and the way a photo is built of color, and how this relates to a woven image where the threads become like a pixel. This is a piece that she showed already using early photographic processes. But there you can see the weaving, and you can also see the way that the photographic image is built of particles. Okay, so then the next thing I noticed was that in so many paintings, there was so many drapery and textiles, but it was never the subject matter. And so I started doing work using the textile image as subject matter. So the weaving of the textile object. And this was in the 80s, when we were all very interested in sort of feminist issues, and so I wanted to emphasize the textile. So just jumping in here, this is called Leonardo's Drapery Frieze. It's 22 feet wide. Takes details of Leonardo da Vinci drawings and paintings, and they're all processed through weaving and painting and run through big presses and so forth. But in the end, what you get is a piece that emphasizes the drapery as the subject. This is another piece that I showed at the Oakland Museum called Material Pleasures. So in this, it's an installation. There are the old masters and old mistresses, details from paintings. But you begin to see the body touching the fabric. This is almost like a bedroom scene where you're looking at details and you see the toe touching the drapery and the fabric on the body. So the touch of fabric on the body. And these are a few more of those pieces. Again, the process, it's very deeply processed, painted, woven. Issues of pattern in here too, my interest in pattern and how pattern is always changing, and movement. So this piece is called Plaintive Touch by Shiva. So again, it's a detail from one of the old masters' paintings, but then it's painted and rewoven. And you begin to see the touch of the hand on the drapery and the body. So as things move along with touch and emotion, this piece is in the show itself. And this was taken from a video I took of myself manipulating fabric, draped fabric, and then it's actually draped. And again, now I'm beginning to focus less on the drapery itself and more on the hand and the touch of face. So I'm moving up toward the face. And this maze pattern is one I use very often. It shows the detail of how pattern can never repeat, but it's still pattern, and it's continually changing. And this is an example of a piece that where I've reinscribed, rewoven a detail from another weaving, and here you see, the face touching the fabric, and it's also my whole series of doll pieces. I also worked on the pixelation of the color, and instead of having a posterized image, I took a face. In this case, I used childhood portraits. I was moving on to the face, but it's broken down into individual pixels and woven. So you see the individual threads as you move closely. And these are some of the larger pieces I did. Some of them done on power looms, but the same weaving process and technique. It was something that I pretty much invented at that time, because in industry you always posterize stuff and put it into weaves, and I just broke my images into individual pixels.
What year was that?
What year was these? I think early 2000s. Can't say exactly. This was a very important piece that I did. These are also using the doll face, but it's the same face. Each one translated it different through weaving. And people kept saying, it's not. This one's sad. This one's happy. This is a different emotion. And to me, that was a very important thing. And here's like a close-up so you can see how different the same image is translated. But what that eventually turned into was this piece which I just showed a couple of years ago, which has 32 pieces, all the same face, woven over and over, in different, translated with different techniques, different colors, and people just, again, it's not the same image, and they walk through it and have different emotional experiences. But I'm also interested in. I noticed that when people look at woven faces, they just have a different emotional response than if you looked at a photograph. I noticed this difference. And so I wanted to do some research around that. And I've always done a lot of research. I did a lot of research into jacquard early on, and didn't really use it in my work till 20 years later. So I'm always doing research into things that interest me, and I don't have any idea how they're going to be used, but they eventually become. So I got involved in research, and I got a hold of Greg Siegel, who brings artists in and turns his lab over to you for a week and does whatever you want. It was fantastic. And so in this, now, she's going to play this. I have a little video. I can't play the whole thing because of time, but I'll show you a few things that went on. Here we're doing EEG, and we have a subject who's getting his head put together, and then you can see what his brain waves look like. And what we had him do was, again, we did a lot of different things, comparing a woven face with a non-woven face. But the one I have an image of is him actually touching the weaving. And what goes on in the brain when you're actually allowed to touch a woven artwork. And then she also does eye tracking, another thing. Here's looking at the pupil. So the subject is another room looking at the artwork, and if it's more emotional, then the pupil gets larger. Anyway, there are all these techniques in the lab, but it's all trying to look at the emotion. What's the difference? Looking at a photograph of a face versus a woven face. Anyway, I'm going to jump out of this video. You can see it on my website if you want to see more of it. And so let's see if we can move on. Okay, these are a few results we did from fMRI. So when they were looking at just a picture of the weaving, there was more response in the insula, which is the touch part of the brain, and the amygdala, which is the emotional part of the brain. And for the photo, there was more visual activity. So here again, it's the same result, but put up in a different way. So more visual processing for the photo, but more emotional and body awareness. And so that was very exciting to me. It wasn't a full study. Nobody wants to fund a full study with 15 subjects, but it was experimental. And this is a piece I did on that. I often document my process, it's not really documentary, it's just taking videos of the process. And I took a frame from that and did a weaving, so it's a weaving of it. This one, Chicago Art Institute just purchased, so very happy with that. So I did my own studies in exhibitions. They were called the Woven Faces Project. In this one, we had a series of woven faces, and what we were interested in, and I worked in collaboration with neuroscientists, but I'm not going to talk about that, only that we asked to look at a distance, look close up, and then actually touch the artwork, and what would happen if they actually got to touch the artwork. And then we got some results from these subjects. Generally, they wish they could touch art more. Okay. And then I did my version of it, which was comparing a big weaving with a big photo, and people went in, it was all set up scientifically, but people went in and wrote their responses. And one of the things that came out of that was I took the data from that and we did some data visualization, and I took that, so this was rating the weave versus the photo, and then I wove it back into the image. So it's, you know, folded back into the image. This is a little bit of an artistic, you know, flexibility here. It's not great science. But some of the things I've done are more specific. This one is in the show too. This is sort of the data visualization, and then that's the way it looks woven back in. Found the weave more emotionally intense, found the weave in photo equally emotionally intense, and found the photo. And the larger the circle, the more people. So that's kind of how that one went. And the last thing here is I had them do a lot of writing about their responses, and one thing I had them write one word that described their emotional response. And so this, then I got a data engineer to analyze the words and make a word cloud for me, which I then wove back into the piece. So the larger the word, like angry, more people put that as their word in response to the image. And then I did it for the photo also, but these are just the woven ones. So these are two smaller ones. So this is very recent. I always hated words in artwork, and so for some reason I ended up putting words in, but anyway, we'll see how that goes. So the very last thing is things that happen accidentally that I don't intend. So I saw this at a conference. This is the structural neural connections in the brain, and it looked like a weaving, so of course I had to get the software from Harvard and learn how to use it, get my brain scanned, there's my neural connections, and do all this stuff. And these scientists always, whenever they saw what I was doing, they said, oh, you can weave a brain. And I'd say, never, never. I'm not going to weave a brain. What do you mean? You know, well, anyway, I'm weaving a brain. So now, can you make that go? Let's see. There it goes. All right. So it's a little 3D whatever. It's only about 10% of the neural connections in the brain. The color is irrelevant to us. But then the larger one is my skull. So that's sort of where it is in my brain. And you can follow, from the amygdala to the insula to the, you can do all this very specific stuff. But here's some of the work based, and of course I had to use images of myself. I did one in which I had a doll face in it, and it was too weird. I didn't show it with my brain. This is Mona Lisa. And these are a couple that are in the show. And the other thing is I've started to weave more coarsely, because what I find is lots of times that people see these jacquard woven pieces, they just look like photographs and they don't get it unless they walk up close. And so I'm starting to weave things with more coarse texture, so a broader public, people other than weavers, can actually see the tactile quality of the image. And when you get back, it goes into focus. Oh, this, all right, you want to start that? So I made this little video, which you're just going to see a little bit. animation of the faces to get more of the tactile quality, and then the sound is Stanford musician. I have his name, but I can't remember at the moment. And he does sound from EEG signals in the brain. So we collaborated on this, and he did the sound for this. These are not EEG, these are structural images, but this little squeaky, that comes from EEG. And he does work with